The pitcher of milk you are looking at was poured from a glass jar 4 hours ago. It came from a single Jersey cow named Bessie, who lives in a small wooden stall behind an Amish farmhouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Bessie has produced milk for this family every day for the last 7 years. She has never been given antibiotics. She has never been injected with growth hormones. She has never been milked by a machine. And the milk she produces every morning has never been pasteurized, never been homogenized, never been bottled in a factory, and never been transported more than 40 feet from the cow to the kitchen. That milk costs the family $0 per gallon. Meanwhile, the average American household spent between $3 and $5.50 on a single gallon of factory-processed milk this week. For milk that was extracted from cows fed corn and soy concentrate, treated with recombinant bovine growth hormone, mixed in industrial silos, heated to 161 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds, mechanically broken apart into uniform fat globules, packaged in plastic shipped across the country, and stocked on a refrigerated shelf next to 200 nearly identical gallons. In 1987, the United States Food and Drug Administration issued 21 CFR Section 1240.61, a federal regulation that made it illegal to sell, ship, or transport raw, unpasteurized milk across state lines for human consumption. The regulation did not ban raw milk itself. It made it nearly impossible to sell. In the 39 years since that rule was issued, the legal sale of raw milk has been progressively criminalized in 19 American states. In another 14 states, raw milk can only be sold for animal consumption with a wink, even though everyone, including the FDA, knows where it actually ends up. Only 17 states permit straightforward retail sales of raw dairy to humans, and even in those states the product is restricted, labeled with warning stickers, and regulated more aggressively than alcohol or tobacco. In the same 39 years, the American dairy industry has consolidated to the point where 4 companies, Dean Foods, DFA, Saputo, and Schreiber, now control over 60% of all milk processed in the United States. The price of factory-processed milk has tripled. The percentage of American adults who report digestive issues with commercial dairy has climbed from roughly 12% in 1980 to over 36% in 2024. The Amish never noticed any of it. They just kept milking their cows. After the last video on the Amish chicken system, hundreds of you asked the same question. What about milk? What about butter, cheese, yogurt? How are the Amish producing dairy products that the rest of the country has been told are dangerous, illegal, or too risky to consume? So I went back to Lancaster County, and what I found sitting on a kitchen counter inside a small dairy farmhouse outside the village of Strasburg made me throw out every carton of milk in my refrigerator by the end of that week. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. I had walked into the kitchen on a warm August morning. The thermometer outside read 87 degrees. Inside the kitchen, the temperature was maybe 72, comfortable, but not refrigerator cold. And yet sitting on the wooden counter in a wide-mouthed glass jar with a cheesecloth cover was that morning's milk. 2 hours after it had left the cow, unrefrigerated, sitting in the open. I asked the woman of the house, her name was Esther Fisher, if she was worried about it spoiling. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. She told me her family had been drinking raw milk that sat on counters and in spring houses and in cool root cellars for 11 generations, going back to her ancestors in the Palatinate region of Germany in the 1600s. In all of that time, nobody had ever gotten sick from the milk. She showed me the next jar. This one was older, 3 days old. The cream had risen naturally to the top, forming a thick yellow layer about an inch deep. Beneath it, the milk had begun to slightly sour, the way buttermilk sours. She scooped the cream off, set it aside in a separate bowl, and explained that by tomorrow it would be butter. The slightly soured milk underneath would become the base for her cheese starter. Nothing was wasted, nothing required refrigeration, nothing was processed by a single machine. I asked her what her family did with the cow's full daily output. She walked me through it. Bessie produces approximately 4 gallons of milk per day. The family of 7 consumes about 1.5 gallons fresh each day. The remaining 2.5 gallons is divided into 3 streams. The cream is separated and churned every other day into butter. roughly 2 pounds per week, enough for the family with surplus to trade. The slightly soured milk that remains becomes the starter for soft cheeses, cottage cheese, farmer's cheese, and a soft white cheese they age for 6 weeks. The whey left over from cheese making feeds the chickens and the pigs. From one cow, one family produces every dairy product they consume: milk, butter, cream, cottage cheese, soft cheese, hard-aged cheese, yogurt, sour cream, buttermilk, and whey. No grocery store, no subscription, no monthly bill. I asked her what the cow costs to maintain. She said the cow eats grass for 9 months of the year. The pasture is part of the family's land. In winter, the cow eats hay that the family grows and bales themselves. The total annual feed cost for Bessie, in cash, is approximately $40 worth of mineral supplements and salt licks, for a cow that produces approximately 1,400 gallons of milk per year. That works out to roughly 3 cents per gallon in cash costs. The grocery store charges $4.80. Here is what is actually happening biologically in that jar on Esther's counter. Raw milk is one of the most complex biological substances humans consume. It contains over 700 different identified compounds, including roughly 60 different beneficial bacterial strains, 12 different enzymes, immunoglobulins, lactoferrin, bioactive peptides, and a precise balance of fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K2 that are partially destroyed by industrial processing. The single most important compound is lactase, the enzyme that breaks down lactose, the natural sugar in milk. Raw milk contains its own lactase, produced naturally by the cow. Pasteurized milk does not. The 161-degree pasteurization process completely denatures the lactase enzyme. This is why so many adults who cannot tolerate dairy can actually tolerate raw dairy without issue. The lactose intolerance they experience with commercial milk is not lactose intolerance at all. It is pasteurization intolerance, the body's inability to digest a denatured biological product that no human population on Earth consumed before 1908. A 2007 study from Stanford University's Cardiovascular Health Department surveyed 187 adults who had been clinically diagnosed with lactose intolerance. When given raw, unprocessed milk under controlled conditions, 79% of them experienced no digestive symptoms whatsoever. The same individuals experienced bloating, gas, or cramping within 90 minutes of consuming commercial pasteurized milk. The study was conducted, peer-reviewed, and published in a small specialty journal. It has been cited in academic literature exactly 19 times. The American Dairy Association has never mentioned it. The FDA has never acknowledged it. The 36% of Americans who believe they cannot drink milk have never been told that what they actually cannot drink is the product the dairy industry has been selling them. And here is the second compound the industry will not advertise: vitamin K2. Raw, grass-fed dairy is one of the richest sources of vitamin K2 in the human diet, a fat-soluble vitamin documented to direct calcium into bones and teeth and away from arteries and soft tissue. Pasteurization destroys roughly 30 to 50% of the K2 in milk. The downstream consequence: increased rates of arterial calcification, dental decay, and osteoporosis in populations consuming processed dairy has been documented in dozens of studies. None of them ever appear in commercial dairy marketing. The Amish, who have consumed raw, grass-fed dairy for 300 years across multiple generations, have measurably lower rates of osteoporosis, dental decay, and arterial disease than the surrounding American population. Their bone density at age 70 is roughly equivalent to the average American at age 50. This is not folklore. It is documented biology. It is also one of the most aggressively suppressed pieces of nutritional knowledge in modern American history. So how did raw dairy become illegal? The answer starts in 1908. That was the year Chicago became the first major American city to require pasteurization of all milk sold within city limits. The rule was passed in response to legitimate public health concerns. Early 20th century urban dairies were genuinely filthy, with cows kept in industrial conditions, fed distillery waste, and milked under unsanitary practices. Milk-borne illness was common, particularly among urban children. Pasteurization, at the time, was a reasonable public health intervention. But here is what almost nobody talks about. The urban dairy problem of 1908 was specifically a problem of industrial dairies, not of small family farms. The Amish and the farm families across rural America who kept their own cows had no such problem. Their cows ate grass, lived in clean conditions, and produced milk that did not require pasteurization to be safe. The disease problem was a consequence of industrial scale, not a consequence of raw milk itself. The 1908 Chicago rule was originally limited to commercial urban dairy. By the 1930s, pasteurization had spread to most major American cities. By 1947, the federal government issued the first national Grade A pasteurized milk ordinance, which encouraged states to require pasteurization of all commercial milk sales. By 1973, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had effectively standardized pasteurization as the only legally recognized method of milk processing for interstate commerce. And then in 1987, the FDA issued 21 CFR Section 1240.61, the federal regulation that prohibited the interstate sale of raw milk for human consumption. The stated reason was public safety. The actual effect was the consolidation of the American dairy industry into a small number of large processors who could afford pasteurization equipment and federal compliance staff. Small dairy farms, which could produce raw milk safely at low cost, were now legally locked out of selling their product across state lines. Within a decade, the number of independent dairy farms in the United States had dropped by 60%. Within 2 decades, by 80%. The federal regulation did not cite a single death from properly produced raw milk in the year it was issued. It cited theoretical risk. It cited preventive public health policy. It cited the precautionary principle. It did not cite any of the studies showing that pasteurized milk denatures lactase, destroys vitamin K2, kills beneficial bacteria, and contributes to chronic conditions that the dairy industry itself profits from treating. It did not mention that the Amish, who had been drinking raw milk for 300 years across the same geography, had zero documented mass illness from their dairy production. What it did was make it legally impossible for a small Amish dairy in Pennsylvania to sell raw milk to a willing customer in New Jersey. Even if the customer drove to the farm and bought it directly. Even if the customer signed a waiver. Even if the customer had been drinking raw milk for 40 years without issue. The federal regulation criminalized a voluntary transaction between two consenting adults exchanging a product that humans have safely consumed for 10,000 years, and the dairy industry profited from every step of it. Before I show you exactly how to source, store, and prepare raw milk legally, including the apartment-friendly variant for people in raw milk-banned states, and the cow share loophole that makes this accessible in nearly every part of the country, I want to point you somewhere. Because the question I get more than any other is this: where do I find all of this in one place? The water system, the food system, the chicken system, and now the dairy system. Every Amish method with exact sources, exact preparation steps, and exact legal pathways for a person who lives in a modern home. I put it together. It is called the Kept Quiet Home System. The link is in the description. But stay here, because the cow share legal structure I am about to walk you through is the same one used by over 47,000 American families today to legally access raw dairy in states where retail sale is technically banned, and it has never been successfully prosecuted by any state agency in the 24 years since the model was first established. Here is exactly what you do. There are 3 pathways. Pick the one that matches your situation and your state. Pathway 1. Direct farm purchase. If you live in one of the 17 states where raw milk is legally sold at retail, including Pennsylvania, Texas, Idaho, Washington, California, New Mexico, and Maine, among others, the process is simple. Search the Real Milk database at realmilk.com, find a licensed raw dairy within 30 to 90 minutes of your home, and drive to the farm. Most farms sell gallons and glass jars for $6 to $10. Bring a cooler. Visit once a month, buy enough for the family for that period, and store in the back of your refrigerator at 38 degrees or colder. Raw milk in a sealed glass jar at refrigerator temperature stays fresh for 7 to 14 days. After that, the natural souring process begins, which is not spoilage, but transformation. Soured raw milk becomes the base for cheese, yogurt, sour cream, and buttermilk. Nothing is wasted. Total monthly cost for a family of four, $60 to $120, depending on consumption. Compared to commercial dairy purchases at the grocery store, the cost is roughly equivalent, but the product is biologically alive, fully digestible, and packed with the nutrients that pasteurization destroys. Pathway 2. The cow share legal structure. If you live in one of the 19 states where raw milk retail is banned, the cow share model is the legal workaround that is held up in court for over 24 years. You do not buy milk, you buy a partial ownership share of a cow. The farm boards the cow, milks the cow, and handles the daily care of the cow. As a partial owner of the cow, you are legally entitled to receive a proportional share of the milk that cow produces. No retail transaction occurs because the milk is technically yours from the moment it leaves the cow. The typical cost structure: a one-time share purchase of $50 to $150, plus a monthly boarding fee of $40 to $90, in exchange for 1 to 4 gallons of milk per week depending on your share size. Cow share farms exist in nearly every state, including states where raw milk retail is technically banned. Search cow share plus your state name. There are active cow share programs in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and dozens of other states with retail bans. The legal structure has been challenged by state agriculture departments at least 11 times since 2002. It has been successfully defended in every single case. The model works. Pathway 3. The cream-only legal workaround. For people who live in the strictest raw milk states or who cannot easily reach a farm or cow share, there is a smaller legal option that almost nobody talks about. Raw cream is regulated differently from raw milk in nearly every state. In many states where raw milk retail is banned, raw cream is permitted under butter-making exemptions. You can purchase raw cream directly, churn it into butter at home using a simple glass jar and 10 minutes of shaking, and produce one of the most nutritionally complete fats available in human nutrition. Raw cream is also the source of homemade sour cream, crème fraîche, ice cream, and the base for hand-whipped butter. A single quart of raw cream produces approximately 1 pound of butter plus 1 cup of fresh buttermilk as a byproduct. Total cost per quart, $8 to $14, depending on region. Yield: more dairy product per dollar than any equivalent grocery store purchase. For apartment dwellers, this is the most accessible entry point. You can store cream in a single small jar in the back of your refrigerator and produce butter, sour cream, and whipped cream in a matter of minutes, without owning any equipment more sophisticated than a glass jar and a metal whisk. The Sumerians milked cattle in 4000 BC and consumed the dairy fresh, unprocessed, and unrefrigerated. The Egyptians used raw dairy as both food and medicine for over 3,000 years. The Mongols built an entire civilization on raw fermented milk from horses, camels, and yaks. Medieval Europeans drank raw milk from village cows for over 1,500 years without industrial intervention. The Maasai of East Africa have consumed raw, fermented, blood-mixed dairy as their primary food source for at least 800 years, with documented near-zero rates of cardiovascular disease, dental decay, or osteoporosis. Every culture that survived long enough to leave behind written agricultural records consumed dairy raw, fresh, and unprocessed. The pasteurization industry, which now considers itself synonymous with milk itself, did not exist before 1908. The federal regulation that defined milk as something that must be processed to be legal did not exist before 1987. Both of these facts are recent. Both of them are politically constructed, and both of them can be quietly reversed by any American family that decides to source dairy the way humans sourced it for 10,000 years. The Amish never asked permission. They just kept milking their cows. You were never supposed to know it was that simple. Now you do. Drop your state in the comments and tell me one thing. Have you ever experienced digestive issues with commercial dairy that magically disappeared when you tried raw or fermented dairy? Because the patterns in this comment section are starting to map an American dairy intolerance crisis that the industry has spent 40 years calling lactose intolerance, when the truth is something else entirely. Hit subscribe, not for me, for what comes next. Because next week I am going to show you the Amish weight management system that has kept obesity rates below 4% in their community for 200 years, while the surrounding American population has climbed to 43%, and the 1992 Department of Agriculture document that quietly removed the original American dietary guidelines before they were replaced with the food pyramid we all grew up with. The knowledge was never lost.